Hello, this is part 3 now of the lesson reading for 2.04, starting with the Battle of Saratoga. As if Washington did not face enough trouble, the commander of British troops in Canada, John Burgoyne, known as Gentleman Johnny, was making his way south. It was slow going because Burgoyne was dragging along a massive load of supplies. In addition to basic necessities for his men, he devoted 30 wagons to such luxuries as champagne and silver teapots, which he considered necessary to the happiness and well-being of himself and his officers. As Burgoyne wound his way through the upstate New York, his progress was slowed by the villagers who felled trees in his path. In September, he finally arrived at Saratoga, New York, where he clashed with more than 12,000 American troops serving under the command of General Horatio Gates. The Battle of Saratoga, perhaps the most important of the war, lasted from September 19th to October 13th, 1777. Burgoyne originally believed that he had the upper hand, but more Americans kept coming. When Major General Benedict Arnold led a group of 1,000 Americans to thwart one of the British columns, the tide turned. Burgoyne surrendered to the rebel forces on October 17th. Like the battles of Trenton and Princeton, the American victory at Saratoga had dramatic consequences. It solidified American morale and encouraged new enlistments. More important, the battle captured the attention of the French, who began to think it might be possible for the small an underfunded Continental Army to beat the Redcoats. So that's important to remember about the Battle of Saratoga, that it gained the attention of the French, and they would soon ally themselves with the Americans, the colonists, in alliance with France. One American in Paris was eagerly encouraging the French to support the Patriot cause. In 1776, the Continental Congress had sent Benjamin Franklin as an ambassador to England's longtime enemy, France. Franklin sought to win formal diplomatic relations between the United States and France. A master showman, Franklin charmed leading members of the French aristocracy. At times he played the part of the simple American frontiersman walking the streets of Paris wearing a coonskin hat. At other times, he cultivated a relationship with the political elites through a skillful blend of backroom diplomacy, flattery, and negotiation. While Franklin had managed to secure some secret funding for the Patriot cause, his efforts were greatly aided by the American victory at Saratoga. The victory prompted France's King Louis XVI to provide formal diplomatic recognition and troops. In February 1778, the French government signed a treaty of alliance with the United States. France recognized the new nation and pledged military aid. In the treaty, America and France promised that unless the other country agreed, neither would enter into a treaty with Britain. France's support of the United States proved to be crucial to Americans' victory in the Revolutionary War. Forging the Army at Valley Forge. While in France, Benjamin Franklin made the acquaintance of a Prussian officer of considerable military skill and experience, Frederick Wilhelm, Baron von Steuben. Hearing that Franklin was in France, von Steuben arranged a meeting and asked if he could help the Continental Army. Franklin sent him on to General Washington. He proved to be a valuable asset to the Continental Army. Toward the closing weeks of 1777, General Howe and his men settled comfortably in Philadelphia, where they intended to wait out the harsh American winter. For British officers and enlisted men, it was a pleasant arrangement. Howe set up headquarters in a luxurious townhouse, attending one party after another and living in high style. Washington's winter could not have been a starker contrast. He, Lafayette, and 11,000 American men were camped about 20 miles away in Valley Forge. The men had little clothing, few blankets, and even less food. Shoeless Washington soldiers tracked blood through the snow. They were so hungry that at night they often shouted, "No meat! No meat!" Many of the Army's horses died from starvation. As commanding officer of the Continental Army, Washington could have separated himself from his men and stayed in better accommodations, but he did not. The willingness to share in the hardships of his men was one of the qualities that earned him the respect and affection of the rank-and-file troops. Meanwhile, Washington sent many requests to Congress for supplies, food, and shelter for his men. Frederick von Steuben came to meet Washington at Valley Forge. The experienced German officer faced a daunting challenge. How could he turn these shivering, shoeless Americans into a proper disciplined army? With Washington's approval, von Steuben set immediately to work, training the soldiers, introducing daily drills, and instilling in the ragged band of Continentals a sense of obedience to authority that their Hessian opponents took for granted. With von Steuben's help at Valley Forge, the Continental Army became a more professional fighting force. And excuse all my yawning, I'm getting very tired here. And here at the next page, it just is a diary excerpt from, it says here, a young surgeon from Connecticut, Albigense Waldo described the hardships in his diary. Dr. Waldo applied for furlough, a temporary leave from the military service, but his request was denied. Meanwhile, only 25 miles away, the British Army waited comfortably in the stately townhouses of Philadelphia. So here's, like I said, just an excerpt, and we'll continue on. Pleading for support. The Babbitt at Monmouth Courthouse. In the spring of 1778, British leaders replaced General Howe with Sir Henry Clinton. Clinton decided that the British should withdraw from Philadelphia and make their way back to New York. I'm sorry for the yawning. But Washington, seizing the advantage, chased Clinton's forces across New Jersey. On June 28th, Patriot forces cornered Clinton's troops at Monmouth Courthouse. Von Steuben's trading served Washington's men well. In what proved a bloody battle in 100-degree heat and thick humidity, both sides lost several hundred men, and neither could claim a victory, but Washington's troops held the field. Washington was now certain that his men could hold their own against an equal number of British troops. When the British made it to New York later that night, Washington decided not to pursue them. The Battle of Monmouth Courthouse ushered in a stalemate that continued for the next 2 years. During which no decisive battles were fought. Victory was still years away. John Paul Jones and the War at Sea. While the Continental Army battled on land, America's fledgling Navy carried on the campaign at sea. In 1775, Congress ordered the creation of the American Navy and soon authorized the construction of 13 frigates. Washington also approved the conversion of hundreds of fishing and merchant vessels for war. These privateers, privately owned ships authorized to fight, made up an important part of America's naval power. Most of the new American fleet was captured or sunk by the superior British Navy, but American naval forces and privateers did manage to interfere with British ships bringing supplies from England to the Redcoats. One American naval officer was especially known for his unwillingness to back away from a fight. John Paul Jones, who was born in Scotland, began his seafaring career as a teenager. He first earned his sea legs working on a boat, then transported rum and tobacco between England, Virginia, and the West Indies. He also worked on a slave ship. Jones regularly got into trouble. He was once even arrested for murder, a charge from which he was eventually cleared. In 1775, Jones went to Philadelphia and offered his services to the Continental Congress. He was quickly appointed to an American naval post. In 1779, Benjamin Franklin secured an old French merchant ship for Jones to refit and command. Jones named the ship Bonhomme Richard, the French title of Franklin's famous book, Poor Richard's Almanac. In September 1799, Jones guided the Bonhomme Richard in an attack against the British ship Serapis. The Richard caught fire and filled with water. Many of Jones' men, wounded and fearing certain death, begged him to give up. It was then when the British captain demanded that Jones surrender, he replied, "I have not yet begun to fight." Jones and his crew finally wore down the enemy, though their victory came at a great cost. About half of Jones's men were killed or wounded, and the Richard was so badly damaged that Jones had to abandon the ship, but the American Navy held the day. Women in the Revolution. Patriotic women found creative ways to aid the American cause. Some women marched with their husbands and cooked and sewed for the army. With so many men in military service, some women single-handedly ran farms and businesses. Well-off women worked as well. Benjamin Franklin's daughter, Sarah Bach, helped raise money for the army, while generals' wives such as Martha Washington and Catherine Greene organized aid for the soldiers in camp. Women also performed feats of daring. For example, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington spied on British officers and then rode 40 miles on horseback to report her findings. Deborah Sampson and several hundred other women disguised themselves and enlisted. Twice wounded before she was discovered, Sampson received a discharge and later a military pension. In the sweltering summer heat of the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse, Mary Ludwig Hayes earned her nickname Molly Pitcher for toting water to her husband, William, and his comrades. But her service did not end there. When William, an artilleryman, collapsed, it is unclear whether he suffered heat stroke or a gunshot wound. Mary took his place behind the cannon. In 1822, the state government of Pennsylvania belatedly recognized Hayes' service with a small annual payment for services she rendered during the Revolution. Most women's sacrifices, however, went unrecorded. Thousands of defended their homes and families, made uniforms and gunpowder, gathered food for soldiers, tended the sick and wounded, faced the deprivation and sometimes terror, and got up the next day to do it all again. Native Americans in the war. Since the opening shots of the American Revolution, many Native American tribes had allied themselves with the British. The Iroquois, under British orders, aided the American settlements in western New York and Pennsylvania. In 1779, Washington sent General John Sullivan and 4,000 soldiers into Iroquois country, where they burned some 40 Indian towns in western New York and systematically destroyed 160,000 bushels of corn. In response, thousands of Iroquois came to Fort Niagara, hoping that the British would provide food and shelter. But the Iroquois did not get much help from the British. During the severely harsh winter of 1779 to 1780, with 5 feet of snow on the ground, hundreds of Native Americans died from starvation and cold. American forces in present-day Illinois and Indiana also battled Indians who had allied with the British. In 1778, Lieutenant Colonel George Rogers Clark of the Virginia militia and 175 soldiers sailed down the Ohio River to the mouth of the Tennessee River. They marched 120 miles inland, seizing the great British post at Kosciuszko and captured the town of Vincennes. But after Clark left, the British Army reestablished itself in Vincennes. Clark vowed to recapture the territory, and in 1779 he launched a surprise attack. His victory secured Americans' position in the west. Now the only region of the continent was the south. The only region left to contest was the south. Turning south. Okay, we're going to stop here on this part, turning south. We'll save that for the next lesson here on page 160. So let's go back to our lesson. Read the pages 144 through 160, complete the reading guide, complete the tracking revolutionary activity online, and complete the checkpoint. So let's continue on. And that's the learn in a battle. Okay. When you have finished the reading assignment, complete the Tracking the Revolution activity online. So let's look at this. Trace the major battles of the early years of the American Revolution. For each battle, select the consequence of the event. So let's just choose one. Oh, we have to go to the next slide. Alright, well anyway, so you go through this and just as a nice little review of consequences of the war. It's not graded, but it's a fun little review activity to do. Okay, so we finished with the reading, and now if we just look at the rest of the lesson, make sure, oops, I better go back there. Make sure you do the tracking activity online. Here's the link. And just read through the directions and see what you should do. And you can do that online activity. Make sure you go through all the pages of that. Then you go to the end, and then you take the quiz. There's a the 2.04 checkpoints. Make sure you complete that at the end of this lesson. And good luck on everything.